Sequels are hard, sometimes even harder than crafting an original story. With the first film, filmmakers have more freedom. They don't have to worry about advancing a pre-established plot, or answering certain questions and demands from the audience. They can tell a story as its own thing, that won't be compared to something that came before, because there isn't such a thing. The audience can fully absorb the movie as it is, being a little easier to notice the creator's intentions with it. Even so, it's not impossible to make a sequel. Some of the best movies ever made are sequels. The Empire Strikes Back, the second film of Star Wars' original trilogy, is considered by most the best film of the entire series. And another sequel from the same franchise that had to deal with huge expectations left from its predecessor was Episode 8, The Last Jedi. The previous movie of the franchise, The Force Awakens, was a big success that injected new life into the series by introducing new characters and bringing back the original cast. In a very nostalgic adventure that left a few mysteries to be resolved in the next movie. Who are the parents of Rey, our new protagonist? Who is Snoke, the new big bad of the franchise? And what happened to Luke Skywalker? The responsibility of continuing the story, answering these questions, fell into the hands of Rian Johnson, the writer-director of the second film of this new trilogy. And his choices had some divisive opinions. Thor Ragnarok, the third Thor movie, was in a similar situation, having to deal with some plot threads from the second movie, Thor: The Dark World, that ended with a revelation. Loki, Thor's brother, villain in other Marvel films, has managed to take control of Asgard by pretending to be his father, Odin, also raising the question of what happened to Odin. All of this to be resolved in the next movie. But not only that, because Thor also appeared in another Marvel movie before Ragnarok, the second Avengers movie, Age of Ultron. That ended with Thor deciding to travel the cosmos to investigate the Infinity Stones. And unlike The Last Jedi, Thor's previous movie wasn't such a big hit with audiences, putting some extra pressure on director Taika Waititi and the writing team of Eric Pearson, Craig Kyle, and Christopher Yost to bring new interest to the franchise. And another film, in a situation not unlike these two, was the sequel of the movie Creep, directed by Patrick Brice and written by Mark Duplass. The first Creep is a very simple film. It tells a story about Aaron, a videographer who answers an ad to do a job for Joseph, who is a very odd person, a little unstable, clingy, and at some moments, sinister. The movie then turns into a suspense, inspired by movies like My Dinner with Andre, Misery, and Fatal Attraction. That raises one question. Is Joseph just a weird and harmless dude, or someone with sinister plans for Aaron? The ending of this movie made the creation of a sequel a very difficult thing, because it is a very clear and conclusive ending, not leaving much to be developed in a sequel. So the next movie would have to reinvent itself, while at the same time not deviating too much from the original flick, just like Last Jedi and Ragnarok. In this video, we'll find out how did these creators manage to overcome these challenges and discover solutions that transform these external pressures into strengths, while answering the question, how do you make a good sequel? Before the production process of Episode 7 even began, Rian Johnson got the offer to write and direct Episode 8. At the first moment, he wasn't very sure about this. It would be his first time working in a big studio film, having only created indie movies, based on his own scripts. But since he's a huge fan of the franchise, he decided to accept this challenge. During this period, the shooting for Episode 7 had just started, and after reading the script for Force Awakens and falling in love with these new characters, he had access to the daily scenes from the production, so that he could build a better picture of the characters, thanks to the acting job from the cast. So he started his process by focusing on the characters individually, and trying to think about possible paths for each one of them in the sequel. Starting with the one he was sure to be the most important character to define, Luke Skywalker.
I had to think it through. I had to get into, this felt right to me, but why did it feel right? Any classic kind of hero's myth that actually is worth its salt. If you look at the beginning of the hero's journey, like with King Arthur, he pulls the sword from the stone, he's ascendant, he has setbacks, but he unites all the kingdoms, he gets all his knights together. And there's always that first arc, but then any one of these things that then if you keep reading, and if it then goes past that and deals with the hero's life as they get into middle age and beyond. You think about King Arthur betrayed by his, best friend and his wife, and, somebody who has completely usurped his kingdom and the product of incest from him, and he has to kill him, but only at the cost of his own life. And it gets into darker places. There's a reason for that. It's because myths are not made to sell action figures. Myths are made to reflect the most difficult transitions we go through in life. Yeah. And that early part of the hero's journey is reflecting I think, is my interpretation, going from adolescence into adulthood, where you're ascendant and you're finding yourself and you're winning. In order for something that addresses middle age and beyond in a really honest way, if you look at the myths, they like the Fisher King, it deals with disillusionment. It feels like starting to feel like you're losing your place in the world. It feels like everything changing and loss. And that's because they're honest, and that's because they have to be honest, because that's what these things are there for, and I feel like it would be a betrayal of them and of Luke Skywalker as a character not to take it seriously enough to reflect that, I think. But if you want to take him seriously as a character, for me at least, it felt important to go into that realm. So anyway.
With a clear picture of Luke, he went through the same process with the other characters, asking himself questions like, what would be their desires and goals in this sequel? What would be the most interesting and challenging obstacles to put in their way? What would their reactions be? What were they lacking to be able to grow and evolve? And slowly, his story started to take shape. A lot of people have this assumption that Johnson, from the get-go, wanted to subvert audiences' expectations and create an antithesis to Episode 7.
It's time to let old things die. Snoke, Skywalker, the Sith, the Jedi, the Rebels, let it all die.
But that actually never was his goal. It was just a consequence of his creative process.
The first thing to say is, coming into writing this or any story, the object is not to subvert expectations. The object is not surprise. I think that would lead to some contrived places. The object is drama. And in this case, the object was figuring out a path for each one of these characters where we challenge them and thus learn more about each of them by the end of the movie.
He didn't choose the most shocking and unexpected answers to the movie's biggest questions. They were a byproduct of an organic process that came from his take on the characters.
This always sounds so kind of like, artsy-fartsy when you say it, but it's genuinely actually nuts and bolts true that if the story is going forward, as a writer, it's more a process of discovery than it is construction. And especially when you hit something that feels right, it always surprises you because it's more like uncovering dinosaur bones of a skeleton that wants to have a certain shape than it is sculpting something, I guess, if that makes sense.
He didn't even have time to take all of the fans' expectations with the first movie into consideration. Because when he started his writing process, Episode 7 shooting wasn't even finished, and when Force Awakens was actually released, Rian Johnson was deep into the production process of Episode 8. All of his creative choices came purely from his creative vision, and what he thought would be more interesting, what he would like to watch, and what he felt would be the best and most honest thing to do for the characters. A very free process, thinking about the future, about what could be more interesting to leave for the next director, with the same freedom, imagination and courage that created the other films in the series, the same way that he writes his original scripts. And as a result, he created a movie that indeed only he could make, breathing new life into the series and opening new paths for the franchise moving forward.
I think the instant you start thinking in terms of how do you not step outside of the bounds of what the original movies did, you're not thinking the way the people who made the original movies did. You know what I mean? They were, with every movie, they were pushing it forward. With every movie, they were stepping outside those bounds and trying new things and pushing the characters into new, emotionally honest but surprising places. You know? That's why those movies are great. That's why they're alive. And if they had been looking at something that came before it and saying, oh, we better not do this because that is outside of this or that, it would have been different, I think.
Taika Waititi, just like Rian Johnson, wasn't really sure if he would accept Marvel's offer to direct Thor's new movie. Waititi also had only worked in smaller productions, writing his own scripts, mostly comedies or dramas with heavy doses of humor. But when he discovered that Marvel didn't really have a script and wanted to inject more energy and lightness into this new movie, he ended up accepting the challenge too.
Why did you want to do it?
I think because it was something unexpected for myself, something unpredictable. I was starting to feel like I might, be repeating myself. When I was editing Hunt for the Wilder People, when they gave me the call and said, would I be interested in this movie? And then they, it was just something that I felt like this could be a career ender in a good way. This could be something that, the idea of it makes me very nervous, and I know that when I've felt like that in the past, it's been a good thing creatively.
Picking up from where the last movies left off, the most obvious thing to do would be to have a more serious, epic, and dramatic film. Even more so with a title like Ragnarok. But since this is not the director's style at all, the first thing that he did was to decide on what type of story he wanted to tell. Something with more improv comedy, more awkward, where jokes go on for too long until they stop being funny, and become funny again because of that. A more intimate and personal tale, a family conflict about someone trying to get back home on a journey with his friends.
The way that I could kind of make myself feel like I had something to offer, and that I guess somehow that there was an in for me creatively, was to think of this thing like an independent film. So when you look at the story, it's just about a guy trying to get home because there's a burglar in his house, right. And he's trying to get home, across the. Just happens to be across the universe that he's trying to travel. But this is really like after hours, set in space. He's like accompanied by his annoying brother and a drunk chick and this bipolar guy who's prone to temper tantrums. And if you think about it like that, just the simplicity of the story, that's my in. That's the way that I can figure out how to make these characters more relatable to the audience and humanize them.
Waititi also wanted to give a lot of attention to things that you normally don't see in superhero movies, making a lot of jokes about mundane situations, or humor that acknowledges the ridiculous scenarios that the characters are in. And during this process, he also tried to picture what situations he thought would be funny, and what types of scenes he could create with these over-the-top characters.
What I find funny are things where Hulk and Thor would be sitting on a bed after having an argument and talking about feelings, because I've never seen that before in a superhero movie, and I find that kind of thing hilarious because it's like when you see how ridiculous over the top these characters are, and then have them talking about stuff that we all talk about, after we've had an argument, that to me is like. That is hilarious to me.
So, together with the screenwriters, Taika Waititi managed to find ways to take advantage of the previous movie's plot threads as a way to jumpstart the story that he wanted to tell. A great example of this is right at the beginning of the film, where they very quickly deal with Thor's journey after the Infinity Stones, and set up a payoff for the movie's final act. Or the big conflict with Loki at Asgard's throne, and Odin's disappearance, that is resolved in a very simple way. Much more focused on these characters' relationships with each other. And then, this leads into the introduction of the movie's real antagonist. By being honest with the type of creator that he is, and with what he himself thought was more interesting, fun, and what he would like to see in this type of film, Waititi and the writers' team have managed to do exactly what Marvel wanted: revitalize Thor's franchise. Now, Creep 2's case was a little different, because it didn't really have this problem of dealing with leftover plot threads. It was literally the opposite. The original film resolves the only big mystery of the story, about what were the real intentions of the so-called creep. We have a healthy awareness of there being an audience for this movie, but there's also an unhealthy version of that, where you are maybe trying to push things into what you think the audience wants. The goal was to make sure we took it to a place that we were still capable of achieving as a filmmaker, and try to make sure we took the story to where it should go. We didn't want to make a sequel that felt like a simple retread to the first one. We wanted to add another layer. So, how did the Brice Duplass duo craft this sequel? They first had to accept that repeating the same formula of a mystery like the first movie was impossible. And then they started to think about what type of story they could tell, now that the cat was out of the bag. But also, what kind of protagonist could have a different type of dynamic with the creep? And while trying to come up with some ideas, they discovered the work of Laurel Nakadate. Laurel is an artist that produced a series of videos where she went to the apartments of men she didn't really know, random men who approached her on the street, this leading into bizarre situations like she doing a dance routine to a Britney Spears song, or bringing a cake and celebrating a fake birthday with these people. And these videos end up being really tense, because she's putting herself into some possibly very dangerous situations. And so, it struck them that a character like this would absolutely want to get involved with someone as bizarre as Joseph, from her own free will. And Joseph himself could be completely honest and open with her, creating a very similar situation to the first film, where the protagonist, Sarah, ends up filming the activities of this weird man for a day, not really knowing if he's an actual threat to her. For this movie, I think wanting to have someone who was not equally as effed up as the guy, but who definitely had an element of questionable intent, was important to us, because it would do a disservice to that character if we just showed her as an innocent. We had to hopefully create a real core motivation for her being there, and also set up a conceit, where not only she's there because she has to be, she's there because she wants to be too. It may come as a surprise, but the second film is able to make you more tense and uncertain about what will happen in the story than the original. Because the duo realized that, with this new dynamic, and no longer having to hide Joseph's real intentions, they could go way more in depth with his character, and show who this person really is. Why is he the way he is? What happened to him? Presenting us to a new question for the movie. This time, a more personal conflict to Joseph's life. This makes it very easy to subvert our expectations, because we are presented to situations that are very familiar to the first movie, but now with Joseph revealing his true intentions with the protagonist right at the beginning of the film. And during the story, showing all of his insecurities with a lot of transparency, looking for a real connection with Sarah. This allows us to create an emotional connection with him, and also makes us really believe in his words. But as the movie goes on, some of his attitudes can make us question his words, and this back and forth keeps repeating until the very end of the film. You'll never really know what's gonna happen in this story. Creep 2 is a true masterclass on how to make a sequel. Starting from a film that initially didn't seem to have any more new places to go to, Patrick Brice and Mark Duplass used a similar structure to the first film to play around with our expectations of what is going to happen, while introducing new layers to its characters, making them go through real changes, and to top it all off, re-energizing the franchise, creating many new possibilities for the future. So, after understanding parts of the creative process of these filmmakers, we can see that all of them did the exact same thing. They followed their guts. They didn't worry about structuring a story in the way that people expected, or with the intent of going against these expectations, or even trying to replicate the success of the previous movie. They did the only thing they could do, thought about what type of film they would like to watch, what they thought was interesting and fun for the story and the characters. To make a good sequel, you have to be able to subvert audiences' expectations, taking advantage of the ideas of the previous films to lead the story and the characters into new realms. And you can only achieve this by being honest with yourself, and honest with your instincts as a storyteller, being truthful to what you would really like to see, what would really move you. Are these perfect movies? No. Did they please everyone? Absolutely not. Nothing pleases everybody, and nothing is hated by everyone. By trying to create something for someone that is not yourself, you are not being honest with your audience, and you end up creating something hollow, with no personality. This being very easy to notice in some huge movies that just want to go through a checklist of popular choices and decisions to try and please the biggest number of people as possible. And I can certainly appreciate much more a film that, even though didn't give me something I expected, is a clear expression of a story that someone really wanted to tell. What about you?
Like, everyone who makes anything makes what they make. It's that we're both kind of doing the same thing, which is creating stuff that in the way that we can create stuff. And maybe this sounds like limiting and bad, but I do feel like there's a way that people make the stuff that they make.
Sounds to me like what you're saying is what you're drawn to, both from the creator side as well as from the fan audience member side, is not the particular brand or style or genre or box. It's someone honestly expressing themselves.
That's what all boils down to, is just chill out
And tell the truth.
Tell the truth. That's what it is, man. Tell something that you care about and tell it in a way that excites you.
Hello! Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. To be completely honest, this video was just an excuse for me to talk about one of my favorite sequels ever, Creep 2. And when I started making the video, I was not really the biggest fan of Thor Ragnarok or The Last Jedi. But the more I learned about the creative process of Rian Johnson and Taika Waititi, the more I started to appreciate both of those movies. And now, after making the video, I must say that I really like Thor Ragnarok and The Last Jedi, and I truly think that both of those movies are really good sequels as well. But that's it for this month. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because next month's video will be about a manga that showcases the greatest strengths and achievements of humanity. See you next month.